Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marta Hernandez, the Executive Director of Californians Together, and it is my great pleasure on behalf of Californians Together and the Center for Equity for English Learners at Loyola Marymount University to welcome you to What Would an Equity-Based LCAP Look Like for English Learners webinar. We thank you for taking the time to join us today to engage in this very, very important topic. During this webinar, we will present the findings from the report In Search of Equity for English Learners, developed by the Center for Equity for English Learners, Californians Together, and the Consortium for English Learners Success. And we will hear from school district leaders who are going to spotlight aspects of their LCAPs that uplift and prioritize the needs of English learners. And so we thought that while districts are beginning to develop their annual update, that this session could serve as a guide and a resource to enhance programs, actions, and services for English learners. And so on the next slide, we have logistics. And so we want you to know that this webinar will be recorded and it will be shared along with the slide deck and resources at the end of the webinar. And there will also be, the chat will be monitored for questions and comments, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A with the panelists after the presentations. And so on the next slide, we would like to know who is in the room in terms of your role in developing your district's LCAPs. And so we're going to launch a poll right now, and we would appreciate it if you would all participate. So who is in the room? All right. And so, Crystal, are we getting a good response? So overwhelmingly, we have district administrators. Perhaps a few of you are actually the LCAP writers. And then, of course, that is followed by county and site administrators, as well as community and family members. So thank you so much. We have a few consultants in the room also. So thank you, all of you, for engaging in the poll and in the chat. And so on the next slide, I would like to provide just an overview of the webinar. And so we will be reviewing the background, the rationale, and the procedures for the 2021-24 LCAP study, as well as highlighting priority area findings from that analysis and providing district level recommendations. We will be featuring district spotlights focused on developing an equity-based LCAP for English learners. So with us, we have two districts. We have Azusa Unified School District, I have to say my hometown. And representing Azusa, we have Norma Camacho, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services. And joining her, we have Adriana Garcia Medina, who is the Director of Educational Services. We also have Madera Unified School District in the house. And today, presenting and representing that district, we have Cheryl Signal, Associate Superintendent of Educational Services. And also joining her, we have Babatunde Yori, the CEO of Parsec Education, former staff member of Madera Unified. And we have Adam Bonilla, the Director of Continuous Improvement. Again, followed by Q&A, and then we will review resources to inform next steps. So on the next slide, I would like to introduce our presenters for the first portion of our webinar today. And our presenters include Dr. Magali Labadens, who is the Levy Presidential Endowed Chair in Ethics and Moral Leadership. as well as the founding executive director of the Center for Equity for English Learners at LMU. She is also the author of the report In Search of Equity for English Learners. Joining us also, we have Dr. Elvira Armas, who is also an author of the report and is the director of the Center for Equity for English Learners and is affiliated faculty in the School of Education at Loyola Marymount University. And also presenting is our very own Shelley Spiegel-Coman, who is the strategic advisor for Californians Together. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Lavadens.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you, colleagues, for joining us this afternoon. This is such an important and noteworthy moment when we look at evidence of LCAP. And on the next slide, you'll see why it's important that in our search for evidence in this retrospective slide that you see here, we have found over the course of 9 years of the report, now 10 years into LCFF, we have found, as you can see from the titles, much lacking in the evidence that we found in the LCAPs. Over the years, as you see here, we found that the evolving accountability system in California has been lacking in regards to what we're able to provide for English learners for their outcomes, and also what evidence we see in the LCAPs about programs, actions, and services. So today we're going to share a little bit very briefly on the next slide about the most recent report that we have published here. There's a little momentary slide delay there, but I'm going to be talking about the process for this current LCAP In Search of Equity for English Learners, and looking at the kinds of questions that we wanted to ask us and the intent behind this most recent report. You can see highlighted in the red bold about what we were looking for in regards to English learners, services, and actions as one of the 3 priority subgroups that were part of the equity intent in the local control funding formula way back in 2013. Now entering its 10th anniversary, a decade after, we wanted to see the evolution of the LCAP template and the degree to which we were able to see language around acquisition programs and how acquisition programs are going to be monitored. You know, those 3 prongs of Castaneda that are required by law that include monitoring for program effectiveness. We were looking for professional development, again, required by law. What and how does professional development for teachers of English learners differ from regular professional development for the general teacher population? We were looking for evidence of an English language development program. And of course, one of the most important facets as part of the 3 prongs of the LCAP intent was stakeholder engagement, educational partners engagement, family engagement. And we were looking for metrics to see how the closing of the gaps were evidenced in the 2021 through 2024 LCAP. On the next slide, you'll see the questions that we asked on the report. Converting those purpose statements into question statements, we re-examined some of the original series of those LCAP reports, those 26 districts, and we added a few others that had high numbers and high percentages of English learners. Again, looking for the descriptions in evidence about those areas that are in A, B, and C. What are the programs? How are they described? How do the metrics analyze, and how do district leaders and community members reflect on the effectiveness of the previous programs and allocation of resources to monitor to what degree they were effective and to what degree they're meeting their outcomes, the intended outcomes in their LCAP goals and actions and services, looking again as deep responses to family engagement. On the next slide, we're seeing also that the process was really informed, should be really informed by what the state has not done. From the very first report, we identified a challenge with our dashboard as part of the state accountability system that has an aggregate indicator for the English learners subgroup. On the left-hand side, you'll see, and you may have seen this slide before as a pie chart, that the dashboard aggregates reclassified and current English learner students, and the majority that you'll see in that yellow bar fall into the yellow, which is more or less a pass. But once we disaggregate those 26 districts, English learner subgroup students into RFEP and English learner students, current English learner students, you'll see that the colors on the dashboard indicating performance level, red and orange being the lowest, show very different results. The lack of the dashboard as part of our accountability system, disaggregating that data puts the focus and puts the onus of responsibility on LEAs to disaggregate the data on their own. And we know we have 1,000 school districts in California. This is a state responsibility, and not all the school districts have the capacity to be able to do that disaggregation. And yet this becomes the first step in identifying what your goals and what are those metrics to closing achievement gaps might be. And that's the evidence that we're looking for in the LCAP for this time frame. Next slide, please. So describing very briefly our review and analysis process, and I know Crystal has been sharing many of our documents and resources in the chat. The analysis process that we took for this review was very similar and yet different, because the LCAP template has changed over time, much having to do with the advocacy that has come from the previous reports. So on the next slide, the description of what that process looked like. We took those sample districts to be representative across the states, those 26 districts with high numbers and high percentages of English learners. They're consistent. Our selection was consistent with the distribution of English learners across the states. We had, from those 23 original districts, we had 23 repeat districts from the first 3 report, and then we had 3 new districts here. And you see this map shows the geographic regions plus the geo leads as well. Next slide, please. Our process was very similar. I don't know if many of you participated. It would be great to see. I can't see you, but I know many of our colleagues from across the state volunteered to engage in this review process, and it begins with the light green quadrant on the top right-hand side of the calibration process. We used our LCAP rubrics from their LCAP toolkit to calibrate the team of reviewers, first independently and then together. Then we were able to reach a consensus rating about the evidence that they're looking for in the LCAPs with one single LCAP at this calibration phase of the moment. Once the ratings were completed, as we move around the circle, we looked for the evidence. So once a rating from good, exemplary, minimal, or no evidence on those rubrics were decided upon by those teams of reviewers. We had 46 reviewers, 2 teams, 2 members in each pair of 23 pairs. And then once those ratings were completed, we asked our colleagues to look back and cite the evidence from which the ratings were sourced. After those ratings were sourced, moving back around the circle, we confirmed those ratings, and then we began to look deeper because we were shocked. We thought we were going to find more evidence in this 4th report. We thought that we would be able to have more insights into how is it that we developed an equity-based LCAP with a focus on English learners, with evidence for English learners over the course of the 9 years and the 4 reports that we had done. So we engaged in a 2-phase qualitative review where we looked deeper. We dug deeper to be able to see and make sure and reconfirm that what our reviewers found was really actually there or not there in the LCAPs. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Armas now.
Thank you so much. And as we present very briefly some of the highlights of the finding of the report, on the next slide, we want to invite you to locate the English Learner Research Aligned rubrics on page 14 of the report, highlighting here the opportunity for you to examine your LCAP, but for you to understand the process that we took, utilizing these rubrics as a resource to identify some of the narrative aspects or the qualitative data, knowing that these research-aligned LCAP rubrics are one, reflective of the research, 2, aligned to the state policy English Learner Roadmap document, and 3, aligned with the state priorities. So as Crystal brings in the fly-in, you'll see for each of the rubrics some of the key elements in terms of the roadmap alignment. And this slide will be here as a resource for you, as is, of course, the end of the report where the rubrics are highlighted. On the next slide, you'll see the rubric categories. So as I highlight some of the findings, we invite you to reflect on the categories and to be thinking about how these specific categories may or may not be evident in your LCAP, and more specifically, how they might help you in this current LCAP processes. On the next slide, want to highlight for you how the requirements in AB 1840, as we transition to the next slide, are really represented in these clusters of rubrics. So there are 4 key areas that we're looking at, and our districts who are highlighting their practices today will touch on some of these areas so that you can see how they engaged in processes and how they were able to be responsive to ELs in their LCAPs. The first area is around how are we designing language acquisition programs for our English learners or multilingual students, and there are 3 rubrics that help us align to that. The next area is professional development, stakeholder engagement, or educational partners, as we are now referring to that category, and EL gap reduction. With these 4 areas in mind, I want to highlight some of the results. The next slide shows specifically how we were looking at framing the equity intent. After all, as Magali mentioned, almost 10 years ago now, LCFF was implemented with, at its core, an equity intent. On the next slide, we invite you to think about how in your responses to the LCAP, whether it be in the plan summary, in the goals and actions, how an equity intent might be specified. The 26 districts that we examined, only 15% of the districts had a specific goal for English learners or a goal that signaled English language development explicitly. 62% of the districts did signal an equity intent in their summary statement, in general information, and these are some examples of how they did it. On the next slide, you'll see, as an example, one district that had an EL-specific goal, signaling access to core, commitment to monitoring the trajectory towards a 5-year process for reclassification to reduce LTEL. And then on the right side, an equity statement as an example of the commitment to equity and access, an assets-based mindset, and really uplifting cultural and linguistic diversity, celebrating and encouraging that, not only in the LCAP, but in the commitment to goals, actions, and services. And might I point out also the alignment to our state policy, the California English Learner Roadmap. Only 35% of the district LCAPs that we reviewed referenced the roadmap. And here's a critical opportunity for all of us to really think about the alignment, what we offer in these rubrics, and how the roadmap can definitely influence the conversation around the design of actions and services. On the next slide, I'll share briefly the overall findings. Actually, 2 slides over. For us to have a sense of what we might be looking for and listening for as we transition to hearing about our district's experiences that are highlighted here today as bright spots. In the LCAPs that we reviewed, we had overwhelmingly a lack of representation for desired outcomes for English learners. What does that mean? There were missed opportunities to describe primary language and second language data reporting systems or processes that were responsive to EL typologies or responsive to different programs that can really support us looking at how we are seeking to narrow or close the achievement gap. Over half of the districts had overall weak or no evidence in the 4 areas that you see here: programs and course access, professional development, ELD, and family engagement. And so what that signals for us is to look at what some of the characteristics from the research are, to be able to have transparent and articulated processes in each of those 4 areas, and how we might refine the way in which we're looking at the development and description of our actions and services. We did see that we had good or exemplary ratings for actions and services with specific mention of language and literacy attainment for designated groups of ELs, targeted support for probable long-term English learners, and inclusive of training for counselors or site representatives that would enable them to inform ELs on their course progress and progress toward UC and CSU requirements. Is it possible to have all of this in the LCAP? We did, from our study, have 2 districts that had overall ratings of good or exemplary, and we have examples in our report of not only the bright spots from these districts, but others. In summary, on the next slide, what you'll see are 4 key findings. And these 4 key findings are aligned to the 4 areas that were required, as I mentioned, in AB 1840, and can be used as a guide for us to think about as we engage with our districts that are here today, to think about how we can have these conversations in our local context. The first, thinking about notable mention of LTALs and newcomer students, yet having limited descriptions of programs and services, we want to hear from our districts how they're going beyond basic approach and access to materials and curriculum to really ensure that descriptions for programs signal articulated approaches to language acquisition and specifically respond to different types of English learners. You'll hear from our districts today how they made very present differentiated growth targets and the commitment to closing the achievement gaps. One of our findings was that there was a direct absence of this in the LCAPs that we reviewed, but we'll hear today how our districts that are here with us were able to achieve this. We'll hear also how they were able to achieve professional development in an articulated way that has integration of ELD standards as compared to what we found in the study where there were disconnected PD. And we'll also hear from our districts today about how they went beyond conventional approaches, which is traditionally what we saw in the LCAP that we reviewed. So with that, I'll pass it along to Shelley to highlight and transition us to our districts today.
So we part of the report is that we have recommendations. Next slide, Crystal. We have recommendations for the state, and we also have recommendations for the counties. And here are the recommendations for the districts. You can see this is just a sample of the recommendations that are in the report. And what's going to be interesting about this is that you're going to see that the districts that we're highlighting really have incorporated these recommendations already into their current LCAP. So you can see that we're hoping that the districts will use our rubrics and align with the roadmap, and also consider developing an English Learner Master Plan. Some of the districts that linked to their English Learner Master Plan really gave a much more comprehensive view of what they were doing. The other part is in the middle is really the whole issue of identifying English learners not as a homogeneous group, but able to identify different cohorts or different typologies of English learners, and having expectations for those students also. And then the last one, of course, is on professional development. Go to the next slide, Crystal. But what I want to show you is something brand new that just came out last week that really is going to hopefully have all of us pay attention if this language sustains itself in the adopt budget that will be adopted in June. This suggested language in the budget trailer bill came from the governor's staff. And so you'll see it really is responsive to some of the findings in our report. The first one on here is really, you can see that in the LCAP, when then there's a numerically significant group, that you have to address the students' needs. And they do list the groups. But interestingly enough, when you look at C, they call out English learners and now separately long-term English learners. So that possibly will be on our new LCAPs. And we're thinking that that's a real step forward. Next slide. if we continue with the information from the budget trailer bill, this is also a piece that we're very interested in. The governor put language in that would suggest that in our LCAPs, districts should, we're going to suggest that the word should be replaced with shall, but that English districts should have metrics and goals to reduce disparities and opportunities and outcomes between student subgroups. So that again was the issue of differentiated growth target to close gaps. And then the next slide is the last piece that's in the budget. And this one is very clear now that districts who have a student subgroup performing at the lowest proficiency level need to include a goal for that student subgroup in the LCAPs. And so you can see, we're going to go on to our school districts now, and you can see these issues that the governor upheld in his proposed budget are really what our school districts are already attending to. And we hope all of you will listen. We hope all of you together that will gain this type of information, and we'll look forward to including that in our LCAPs in the future. So I really want to turn this over to our Azusa Unified School District team, to Norma and Adriana, and take it away, both of you.
Thank you. Adriana is going to start us off. Next slide. We are happy to be here to share about our LCAP. We are very proud of what we are able to provide and represent for our English learners throughout. Next slide.
So thank you, Norma. Central to providing an equity-based LCAP specifically for our English learners is definitely having that community engagement and really approaching it as not just attempting to involve our family and community, but also including our students and our staffs in the LCAP process. We approached the community involvement through the formation of our PAC Plus committee. And that was an open recruitment across the district, across various platforms. We used our Blackboard Connect, our Parent Link, our social media blasts to outline the commitments that families were taking in being participants in this group, as well as dates and times. From that, we were able to have a large pool of interested parties, and we were able to make sure that we had representatives not only from each of the school sites, but also those high need subgroups. So that was central to making sure that we had good representation. From there, we also involved our DLAC. We include monthly updates to our DLAC committee meetings where we share the LCAP process and we take input from them as well. We partner with Youth Truth to implement a district-wide survey that goes to families, students, and staff that have specific questions that relate to our English learner students. And that really gives us good input in terms of adjustments that we might need to make to our actions and services for our students. We have scheduled board presentations that are not only presented to the board, but they're also presented to DLAC. They're presented to our district principals, who also present at their school sites to try just to build that knowledge around the LCAP and its goals and actions and services. We took a similar approach with our students. We recruited students through the use of our site admin, our school counselors, and our leadership teams to get a good representation of students across the different throughout all three high schools. And so just having that student voice really made an impact on some of the actions and services that we provide for our students. The next slide shows you what we have on our district website, which is on our LCAP overview document. This is an attempt to make the LCAP comprehensible to all of our educational partners, our families, our staff. It takes the LCAP and it creates it into a 9-page document that has a lot of visuals, a lot of graphics, and it just tries to streamline the information just to ensure that equity and access to our community. Next slide.
So emerging multilingual learners are represented in all areas of our LCAP. The California English Learner Roadmap heavily influenced the development of our LCAP and how our actions and services address the needs of our multilingual learners, along with what our needs assessment surfaced. We really looked to ensure that we addressed the 4 principles outlined in the English Learner Roadmap throughout our LCAP in order to reduce any gaps and increase the achievement for our emerging multilingual learners. Goal 1 is all about providing students with 21st century learning environments. Next slide. And, one example of one of the actions is how we have provided access to a broad course of study for our English language learners by extending the school day with 0 and 7th periods, and also really looking at our master scheduling to ensure that English learners have access to a broad course of studies. Some examples are offering Latinx studies, Spanish, art, music, and again, ensuring that our English learners have access to those courses along with English language development. Next slide. Goal 2 is all about how we provide support to our parents and families through authentic engagement and leadership opportunities so that they are able to participate and partner with us in supporting their students. Next slide. So some examples of how we measure that is looking at attendance rates through our ARIES systems and our student information system, our suspension rates, survey data, and really looking at all of our student groups and again, highlighting our emerging bilinguals to ensure that we are addressing their needs, that they aren't kind of buried in the all, and ensuring that we are providing the support that those parents and families need. Next slide. So a couple of examples from that of actions and services from that goal are providing bilingual community liaisons at all of our schools to support our parents and families. Next slide. And growing our Azusa Parent Learning Network, which helps to provide parent leadership, professional development to our parents and families, looking at how we address some of the areas of need for our families through some presentations and educational opportunities for our parents and families in socio-emotional learning, as well as supporting their students in their trajectory from elementary school to high school, helping them understand A through G requirements, and really getting to the heart of educating our families to be advocates for their children, to ensure that they are receiving all of the benefits that they can through our district. Next slide. Goal 3 is all about our narrowing our college and career readiness gap for our students and preparing them for college and career transitions. Next slide. So some examples of some of the metrics in this area is looking at our SBAC data and also, next slide, our graduation rate. And again, always making sure that we are looking at our data from our subgroups, and internally we also dig a little deeper in looking at how our long-term English learners progressing, how are our newcomer students progressing? So really getting to the heart of who are our multilingual learners and how are we ensuring that through our actions and services in our LCAP, they are receiving the supports that they need. Next slide. So a couple of examples of some actions and services in this goal include providing professional learning and materials to increase the preparedness for our students who are going to be attending college, paying for PSAT and SAT for our high need student groups, which include our multilingual learners, as well as our homeless and foster students, providing AVID programs at our high school and middle schools for students. Next slide. Goal 4 is all about how we support specifically our emerging bilingual students in their language acquisition, supporting their biliteracy, reclassification, and their overall academic achievement. Next slide. So again, looking at metrics that help us to gauge how our multilingual learners are progressing. Again, looking at SBAC and other internal assessment data, but also looking at the rate of A through C grades for specifically our 9th grade students to ensure that they are on track for graduation. We want to continue to increase our graduation rate for our multilingual learners, and also looking at our reclassification rates. Next slide. And ensuring that those are continually growing. Also looking at how our multilingual learners are progressing toward language proficiency. We look at a couple of measures here. One, we look at how our ensuring that our multilingual learners, that the percentage who are proficient, who are receiving that overall 4 on LPAC is increasing, but also that all of our students across those proficiency levels are making appropriate growth so that they are on track to receive or to achieve that 4 in an appropriate amount of time, and that they don't become long-term English learners. We also, again, look specifically at our LTEL rate and ensure that we are continually reducing that rate to increase or ensure that those students are not being left behind. Next slide. So, again, actions and services that are targeted specifically for multilingual learners, really looking at how we are providing comprehensive interventions for them and addressing all of their needs through pre-referral interventions, ensuring that the interventions that are being provided to them are targeted through multiple data points. Next slide. One of these ways that we look at that is ensuring that our instructional approach is always providing opportunities for students to engage in collaborative practices, that they have opportunities to discuss and build on one another's ideas, that the instruction that our students are receiving are at the appropriate levels of rigor, that they are receiving grade level instruction with the appropriate supports to provide them those entry points where they can engage in academic discourse and continually increase that academic language development. Next slide. Some more examples of the actions and services that are targeted specifically for our multilingual learners is, that academic support, not only for students, but also for families, making sure that all of our families, even low incidence languages, have access to translation. We are predominantly our 91% Latinx, but we also have other families who speak other languages. We have Arabic, we have Vietnamese, we have Mandarin, and we want to ensure that all of our families and all of our parents of multilingual learners have access and have opportunities to engage. Next slide. providing early childhood programs that provide bilingual support and dual language instruction. Next slide. Again, supporting professional learning that targets specifically the needs of English learners to reduce DNF rates, really targeting through professional learning communities and looking at data to ensure that our students are receiving those targeted supports that they need. And also providing intervention support and providing training to our teachers in the English language development standards, and really understanding that progression of proficiency levels and how, when we look at where students are, those supports are outlined and how they can use the English language development standards to provide supports for their students. Next slide. And again, having other means to monitor the language acquisition of our students in addition to the LPAC. So frequent opportunities for formative assessment, providing dual language immersion programs from preschool through high school. Next slide. And finally, our goal 5 is all about how we address.
Norma,
Yes.
hi, this is Shelley, Norma.
Yes.
I think we really appreciate the overview, but you know, there's so much that we have to do within this webinar. So congratulations to all the wonderful work that you're doing over Azusa. And I think we want to just turn it over, if we can, over to Madera Unified School District. Thank you so, so much, both Adriana and Norma. Go ahead, Madera.
Well, I guess I'll start. My name is Babatunde Ilori. I'm currently the CEO of Parsec Education, but before starting at Parsec, I had the pleasure to work with Cheryl Sissel, who should be on your Brady Bunch Zoom screen somewhere, because I don't see him anymore, and Adam Benia at Madera Unified before I left. I had the pleasure of leading the work of the LCAP before I left over to Parsec Education. And back in October of 2022, we're providing technical support for Madera Unified right now. But I am glad to be on this call, and I will go ahead and introduce or let Cheryl introduce herself. And I know they spelled her last name slightly incorrect. Cheryl Sissel, go ahead.
Thank you, Babatunde. Out of the need to get through this in a timely manner, I think it makes the most sense for us to just get right to it, Babatunde. So we can fast forward to the next slide. There's Adam, and I felt like it was important for us to start with sharing with the folks on the webinar who we are in Madera Unified. So geographically, if you took your finger and dropped it right smack dab in the middle of a map where California, you would find Madera. And as a school district, we are a school district of 30 schools. We have 19 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 5 high schools, 1 community day school, and 1 adult school. And we're right under 20,000 students. You can see that we are 91% Hispanic, 5% white, 1% African American, and then 3% would be other races or ethnicities. As far as our English learner population, we hover between about 30% and 27% English learners in our district. We are 89% low income, and we have 1% of our student population, which are foster youth. Next slide, please.
So really, when we talk about the LCAP, and like, I think that, you know, I'm a big believer in doing the LCAP, but doing the LCAP in a way that's authentic and shifting from a compliance document to something that's truly meaningful. And that's a journey we were doing in Madera Unified when I was there. I know Cheryl and Adam are passionate about continuing that to make it truly instead of a compliance document, a true like living, breathing document that is utilized through our system. And it's a journey, it's tough, right? But it starts off with the question of what does your school system or organization value, right? And just think about that. What do you value? What do you truly think about as it relates to valuing as a school system and improving student achievement, right? And if anyone wants for, next 30 seconds or so, go ahead and write that in the chat. I'm just curious what you're going to say. I know there's a lot of administrators on this call. There's people that are representing other types of organizations, but what does your school system or organization value? Go ahead and drop it in the chat. And the idea is this: do you value what you measure, or do you measure what you value? Think about that, right? Do you value what you measure, right? So the state of California has a California dashboard. And the California dashboard, as Shelley stated and Martha and others from California Together stated, there's areas to improve, right? There's areas that we need to look at and say, we need to go beyond just the dashboard currently because it's not quite there yet. There's good things and there's things that needs to be improved. And that's what we did in Madera Unified. And Cheryl will talk a little bit about this, and Adam as well, about basically our local system, because we leverage the fact we have this ability to create a local accountability system, right? And getting into measuring what we value. And we went through a whole process. We used monopoly money and we went through a whole process to say, what are the most important things we need to measure in Madera Unified? And guess what came out on top? Like resoundingly on top was measuring progress as it relates to emergent multilingual student achievement. Resoundingly, when we went through that process using monopoly money and going through it with our leadership team. And so when you review our LCAP, we're going to talk and highlight some of those pieces in the LCAP, but I wanted to share with you that it wasn't just something we wrote on a piece of paper, right? This is something that is a true focus. Large investments were made, large resources were committed to improving student achievement in Madera Unified with an intense focus on emergent multilingual student achievement. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So here is a screenshot of our LCAP. And this is just one example, just to give you a sense of these types of things. One metric here is the percent of students, English learner students who made progress toward English proficiency. That, by the way, is currently the only true growth calculation, in my opinion, on the California dashboard, because it's following the same student that has taken the LPAC twice, right? So this is a true growth calculation. I would argue the cut points are a little too low for the 1 through 5 rating, but it is a true growth calculation that's following the same student. And this was one of the indicators in Madera Unified when we went through our monopoly money thing, and we went through coming up with indicators that are very important. This was one of the top ones that came on the list. And of course, we have our English learner reclassification rate right below. One of the things in Madera Unified that is critically important is not just looking at the reclassification rate, but looking at students who scored a 4 on the LPAC and whether or not they are meeting the criteria to reclassify, right? So there's an intense focus on looking at disaggregated data points in a way that's very meaningful, and we're constantly looking at that and refining and analyzing that. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. And here is some disaggregation along, and this is where Adam was very took a lot of lead last year in, and he got promoted into his current role. But really looking at disaggregated results for all of our different programmatic metrics that we have, right? And so here it's just an example of our local assessment. And what we have done, not just looking at overall status of how our emergent multilingual students are doing as it relates to for example, reading and mathematics, but we're looking at individual student growth, which is a different example we have in our LCAP as well. We're looking at what's the number and percent of students meeting their, what we call best growth target on the NWA local assessment, right? And so we're following the same student and looking at how they started and how they ended up, and in disaggregating it by student groups and giving them each student an individualized growth target. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. And I'm going to hand this off now to Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Babatunde. So what you're looking at here is an example of an action from our LCAP. So this LCAP action is under goal 2. And in Madera Unified, our goal 2 is to demonstrate equity through resource allocation, meaning that we're choosing equity over equality. We recognize that all kids, all schools, all families, all stakeholders have different needs. And so for Madera Unified, goal 2 is really around resource allocation and looking at that equity before equality is that lens. So as we look at this particular action under goal 2, we have 4 to 5 individual actions that are specific to emergent multilingual students. And I'm thinking that our LCAP will be dropped in the chat in Spanish and the Spanish and English version for everyone to be able to grab so that you can look at the whole document. But if you look here, one of the things that we believed in with 100% is involving our parents of our emergent multilingual students. And I know that we don't have a slide in here that is addressing our stakeholder engagement, but I would say that one of the areas that I'm most proud of is our stakeholder engagement and the work that we did with our district English Language Advisory Committee. We have a wonderful and committed group of parents that meet with us monthly and bring us amazing feedback, and really hearing those parents and bringing them into this work helped us write what I think is one of the strongest LCAPs because of our call outs for the needs of our emergent multilingual students. Also, as a result of the strong feedback that we received from our district English Language Advisory Committee, we felt like we needed to reach more parents. So this fall, we went to 6 schools in the district, and we chose the schools that had the highest population of English learner students. And we did listening sessions with our parents and spent about 2 hours in the evening with parents from across our district, really listening to what they felt like their needs were and what their students' needs were. And I know we're only looking at one action, but there's 4 more actions under this goal that really address what our parents and our stakeholders said that they would need in order for their students to be successful. But what I will show here is, and if you reflect back on what was shared earlier as part of the rubrics that you looked at, it was around ensuring that there's a high quality comprehensive program for all English learners. So Madera Unified has invested significantly to sort of reboot that. In a school district that's 89% Hispanic and about 30% English learners, we just weren't happy with what we were calling our K-12 program for English learners. So we have invested significantly and partnered with San Diego State University to initiate a complete reboot K-12 of our both integrated and designated ELD programs. With that has come significant training for administrators, district administrators, school site administrators, and most recently, we had an amazing full day of training for every certificated and classified employee in the district. I'm not exaggerating there. Every certificated and classified employee in our district spent a full day in what we called Student Champion. It was our day 2, and the whole day was committed to emergent multilingual students and how we really felt like we needed to engage our entire school district to support this student population. So this action is one of our actions in goal 2. I'm going to move forward. I got you, Shelley. I saw that. Here we go. Sorry, next slide.
So in the increase in improved services section in the LCAP, much like Babatunde said, if we were truly treating this as a compliance document, it would have been really easy to say, refer to all the different goals and all the different actions. But we wanted to, again, bring a lot more transparency to this document and call out the indicators that we are looking at for all the English learners, for all of our foster youth, for all of our low-income students. So we really wanted to stress that, yes, we do understand that these specific subgroups are trailing behind our overall population. Next slide.
So one thing that we wanted to point out here is that our district commitment to emergent multilingual students goes well beyond the LCAP. Many of you know during the pandemic, we didn't have dashboard results. As a district, we felt like it was really important to still have a way to monitor the progress of our students significantly, our significant student groups. And so we developed something called the Madeira Learning System. And this would be, if you're looking at our LCAP, this would be under goal 3, which is high quality educational systems with aligned curriculum and instruction and accountability. So this is called the Madeira Learning System. This is a screenshot for you to see. You'll see circled in gold. Again, Babatunde referred to a process that we went through where we asked administrators, we asked students, we asked parents to take some, we believe, bucks and place them in an area where they felt had the greatest value. And overwhelmingly, the highest investment was made in our emergent multilinguals, and specifically looking at the percentage of reclassified students who scored a 4 on the LPAC. Another big piece to that, which I see is possibly coming out as a statewide indicator, is what about our LTELs? We made a significant investment in our long-term English learners and really focusing on those students, knowing their story, and asking our schools to really get with those kids and help them see the reclassification process is in their hands. Because as you all know, a student's trajectory changes significantly if they don't reclassify by 6th grade. So we have a action in here that talks about reclassifying students specifically before leaving 6th grade. Next slide, please.
Yes, and Cheryl just alluded to all the different community meetings we had, getting feedback from all kinds of educational partners. And I'm just going to zip through because I got a little chat message from Shelley saying we have till like 2 minutes till 5. So I'm going to zip through this part. But what we did was we came up with these reports here, and it's really a multiple measures report. It's called Me2Be reports that every single student gets, and they get an individualized student growth target. Emergent multilingual students also get not just this kind of report where parents can see, students can see, and teachers can see where you're progressing, both in English and Spanish, by the way, these reports, which is really neat. If you go to the next slide, we also have an English learner tracker report as well. And I know that Cheryl has Adam here, but she also has other team members that are focusing in on, emergent multilingual student achievement, Mercedes Ochoa specifically, and her team, and Berta. But they leverage these types of reports in tandem with the Me2Be reports to say, this is how a student is progressing for reclassification as well. So again, the idea is to communicate these things in a way that allows a parent, a student, and a teacher to really see how progress is being made and where they need to go for next steps. And then you could see like even the open-ended questions. What are your dreams and your future aspirations for college and career, right? what are those challenges? What are next steps we can do? And these are the types of things and systems, you know, that were generated really from those community meetings, from engaging with our parents and our students and our teachers, and through this doing the LCAP process in an authentic way, you know. And I think that that's the beauty of it. If we do it authentically, then it really is meaningful versus just doing it because of compliance and then complaining, oh, we have, you know, to do this LCAP and do these. No. Take it as a great opportunity to improve student achievement, legitimately capturing the feedback and making those important changes that we need to make. And that's what we did in Madera. And so I'm really proud of the work we did in Madera. And I think Cheryl, Adam, there's other leaders in Madera that are very committed and passionate about this.
Okay, Martha.
And so with that, we've run out of time. I want to thank Azusa Unified and Madera Unified for sharing their equity-based LCAPs. Thank you so much. You've shared so much for others. Everyone is, you know, wanting, you know, all of the links. Again, thank you. And I want to thank all of you who joined us. I can see there's a big interest in wanting to do the right thing for English learners. And so thank you. And again, I love that LCAPs are not a compliance document, but really a strategic plan, a blueprint for the future, and that we can use the EL roadmap as a guide also. So again, thank you all. Thank you all.